The spring afternoon cast a golden glow over the suburbs of Asheville, North Carolina. The air carried the sweet scent of blooming dogwoods and the gentle chirping of birds returning from their winter migration. Logan Jenkins, a lanky 12-year-old with curious eyes and a mop of unruly brown hair, had wandered farther into the woods than usual. His parents had always cautioned him about venturing too deep into the forest that bordered their backyard, but Logan felt a strange pull that day, a feeling that something important awaited him. As he pushed aside a tangle of wild raspberry bushes, the sound reached him first, a pitiful whimpering that made his heart clench. Following the distressed cries, Logan stepped into a small clearing and froze. There, caught in an iron snare, was a black bear cub no larger than a medium-sized dog. The trap had clamped around one of its front paws, and the poor creature was thrashing in panic, its dark eyes wild with fear. "Hey there," Logan whispered, kneeling at a safe distance. The bear cub jerked its head toward him, baring tiny teeth in a desperate attempt to appear threatening, but Logan could see the terror behind the display. The cub was skinny, likely separated from its mother for some time, and now trapped in this cruel device. Logan remembered what his science teacher had said about wild animals: they were unpredictable when frightened, even the young ones. But he couldn't just leave the cub to suffer. Settling cross-legged on the ground several yards away, Logan began to sing softly, a nursery rhyme his mother had taught him when he was small: "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." The gentle melody seemed to float on the spring breeze. The cub's frantic movements gradually slowed, its eyes still fixed on Logan, but with curiosity now mingling with the fear. "I'm going to help you," Logan said between verses, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "but I need my dad for that." Keeping his movements slow and deliberate, Logan pulled out his phone and texted his father, "Dad, I need you in the woods behind our house. Follow the path past the big oak. Please come alone. It's an emergency." Jack Jenkins was in the middle of repairing a kitchen cabinet when his phone buzzed. Reading his son's message, his stomach dropped. Jack had always been protective of Logan, especially since his wife's passing 3 years ago. The thought of his son alone in the woods with some unspecified emergency sent a chill through him. Grabbing his tool belt, which contained a multi-tool that might come in handy, Jack rushed out the back door and into the forest. He found the oak tree Logan had mentioned and followed the faint trail beyond it, calling out his son's name in a hushed, urgent voice. "Over here, Dad," came the reply, and Jack pushed through the underbrush to find Logan sitting calmly on the forest floor, singing softly to, Jack's breath caught, a bear cub trapped in a snare. "Logan!" Jack hissed, fighting the urge to rush forward and snatch his son away from the wild animal. "Get back from there right now." Logan turned, his eyes meeting his father's with a pleading look. "Dad, he's hurt. We have to help him." "That's a wild bear, Logan. Even a cub can be dangerous. We need to call animal control or the wildlife service. They'll take too long." Logan insisted. "Look at his leg, Dad, the trap is cutting into it. He's scared and hungry." Jack ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, torn between concern for his son's safety and the undeniable suffering of the trapped animal. The cub had stopped struggling and was watching them both with those intelligent, pain-filled eyes. "Please," Logan said simply, and something in his son's voice broke through Jack's hesitation. "All right," Jack sighed, approaching cautiously, "but you stay back while I work on the trap, and if the mother shows up, we run. No arguments." Together they assessed the situation. The trap was an old-fashioned, spring-loaded device, illegal in most places now. Jack recognized it as the kind used by poachers rather than legitimate hunters or trappers. The thought that someone had deliberately set this cruel contraption made his blood boil. "I've got some honey in my backpack," Logan said suddenly. "I always bring a snack when I explore. Maybe we can use it to distract him while you work on the trap." Jack nodded, impressed by his son's quick thinking. "Good idea. Place it just beyond the trap's reach, then back away." Logan retrieved a small jar of honey from his pack and carefully set it down where the cub could see and smell it but couldn't quite reach it. The sweet aroma caught the young bear's attention immediately, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed eagerly. While the cub was distracted, Jack moved in with his multi-tool, working to release the mechanism. The bear flinched when Jack got close, but its desire for the honey seemed to outweigh its fear. With careful manipulation of the spring, Jack managed to release the pressure enough for the trap to loosen its grip. "There we go," Jack murmured as the trap fell open. "You're free now, little guy." The cub hesitated, looking from Jack to the honey jar and back again. Then, with surprising speed for an injured animal, it lunged for the honey, knocking the jar over and lapping eagerly at the golden liquid that spilled onto the forest floor. "What should we do now?" Logan asked, watching the cub devour the honey. "We can't just leave him here, his leg is hurt and he's all alone." Jack pulled out his phone. "I'll call the Wildlife Rescue Center. They'll know how to handle this." But as Jack made call after call, he was met with the same response. They were either understaffed, underfunded, or unwilling to take in a bear cub. The concerns were always the same: they didn't have facilities for a bear, or they worried about what would happen when it grew larger, or they feared the dangers of an adult bear that had become habituated to humans. Meanwhile, the cub had finished the honey and was attempting to stand, only to collapse when it put weight on its injured leg. It let out a pitiful cry that made Logan wince. "No one will take him, will they?" Logan asked, reading the frustration on his father's face. Jack shook his head. "Not right away, at least. They all have concerns about housing a bear, even a cub." Logan's eyes welled with tears. "We can't leave him, Dad. He'll die out here all alone." Jack looked from his son to the injured bear cub, weighing the enormous responsibility against the pleading in Logan's eyes. It was the same look Logan had given him when they'd found a stray dog last year, a look that had resulted in the addition of Max, their loyal golden retriever, to the family. But a bear was not a dog. This was wild, potentially dangerous, and definitely illegal to keep. And yet, as the cub looked up at them with those soulful eyes, licking honey from its paws despite its injury, Jack felt his resolve weakening. "Just until his leg heals," Jack said finally, "and only if we can find a vet willing to look at him. Then we find him a proper wildlife sanctuary. Understand?" Logan's face lit up with a smile that Jack hadn't seen since before his mother's passing. "I understand. Thank you, Dad. I'll call him Buddy." "Don't name him." Jack groaned, but it was already too late. The cub had a name, and with it, a place in their lives. Getting Buddy home proved to be a challenge. The cub was too heavy for Logan to carry, and while Jack could manage the weight, he was wary of picking up a wild animal, even an injured one. They improvised a stretcher using Jack's jacket and a fallen branch, coaxing Buddy onto it with the last smears of honey from the jar. As they carried their unusual cargo through the woods toward home, Jack couldn't help but wonder if he'd lost his mind. Here he was, a respected structural engineer and widowed father, smuggling a wild bear cub into the suburbs. If any of his neighbors saw them, they'd think he'd gone completely around the bend. Fortunately, their home sat at the edge of the development, with the forest on one side and their nearest neighbors a good distance away on the other. They had a detached garage with a small storage room that Jack had been meaning to convert into a workshop. It would have to serve as Buddy's temporary quarters instead. "We'll need to make it comfortable for him," Logan said as they gently transferred Buddy onto an old blanket in the corner of the storage room, "and we need to get his leg looked at." Jack nodded, already mentally calculating what supplies they would need and who might be willing to help them with their unusual predicament. "I know a vet who might be discreet, Marianne Wilson. She helped with that injured hawk we found last summer, remember?" Logan's face brightened. "Marianne. She's cool. She'll help Buddy for sure." Marianne arrived later that evening, her kind face creased with concern as Jack explained the situation. She listened without judgment, then followed them to the garage to examine her unusual patient. "He's malnourished," she said after a careful examination of the sedated cub, "and the leg has a nasty wound from that trap, but surprisingly, no broken bones. With proper care, he should heal completely." "So we can release him back into the wild soon?" Jack asked hopefully. Marianne's expression grew troubled. "That's the complicated part. He's very young, probably only a few months old. He should still be with his mother, learning how to survive. Without those skills?" She let the implication hang in the air. "So what do we do?" Logan asked, his voice small. Marianne sighed. "Ideally, he should go to a wildlife rehabilitation center that specializes in bears, but I understand you've already tried that route." Jack nodded grimly. "No takers so far." "Then you have a difficult decision to make," Marianne said. "If you decide to keep him until a better option comes along, remember this: if he stays, let him live his own way. Don't try to turn him into a pet. He's a wild animal, and he needs to maintain as much of his natural behavior as possible." With those words of wisdom and a supply of antibiotics and painkillers for Buddy, Marianne left them to their new reality. Jack spent the next day reinforcing the storage room, adding a sturdy lock to the door and creating a comfortable space for their temporary house guest. Logan researched bear diets and behavior, filling a notebook with information that might help them care for Buddy properly. As the days passed, Buddy's health improved dramatically. The wound on his leg began to heal, and with regular meals, a carefully researched diet of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and the occasional fish from the local market, he gained weight and strength. His personality emerged too, curious and playful one moment, shy and cautious the next. Logan spent every spare moment with Buddy, sitting quietly in the converted storage room, reading books aloud or simply talking to the bear cub as if he were another person. Jack worried about his son becoming too attached, but he couldn't deny the positive change in Logan since Buddy's arrival. The boy smiled more, laughed more, and seemed more engaged with life than he had in the difficult years following his mother's death. One evening, about 2 weeks after they'd brought Buddy home, Logan approached his father with a determined expression. "Dad, Buddy needs more space. He's getting stronger, and that little room is too confining for him." Jack looked up from his laptop, where he'd been researching wildlife sanctuaries that might eventually take Buddy. So far, he'd had no luck finding a suitable placement. "Logan, we can't just let a bear roam around the house." "Not the whole house," Logan clarified, "but maybe we could let him into the fenced backyard sometimes? Under supervision, of course. And we could bear-proof the fence to make sure he can't get out." Jack considered the request. Their backyard was spacious and private, bordered by the forest on one side and tall privacy fencing on the others. With some modifications, it could be made secure enough for Buddy to have some outdoor time. "All right," he conceded, "but we'll need to reinforce the fence first, and one of us has to be with him at all times when he's outside." Logan's face broke into a wide grin. "Thanks, Dad. Buddy will be so happy." The following weekend, they worked together to secure the yard, adding height to the fence and burying wire mesh along its base to prevent digging. They created a small pool for Buddy to splash in and arranged logs and branches for climbing and exploration. When they finally introduced Buddy to his expanded territory, the cub's reaction was worth all the effort. Buddy bounded across the grass, rolling and tumbling with newfound freedom. He investigated every corner of the yard, sniffed every plant, and eventually discovered the joy of the small pool, splashing with abandon and soaking both Logan and Jack in the process. As spring gave way to early summer, their routine adjusted to accommodate their unusual house guest. Buddy split his time between the storage room, which had become his den, and supervised excursions into the backyard. Jack continued to search for a permanent solution, but with less urgency, as Buddy became an increasingly integrated part of their lives. It was during this time that they discovered Buddy's strange and endearing quirks. The first surprise came when Logan was watching cartoons in the living room and Buddy, who had been napping in his den, suddenly appeared in the doorway, drawn by the animated sounds from the television. Logan froze, uncertain how his father would react to finding Buddy inside the house, but Buddy solved that dilemma by padding across the room and sitting directly in front of the TV, his head tilted in fascination as animated animals cavorted across the screen. When Jack returned from the kitchen with snacks and found a bear in his living room, his initial shock quickly gave way to amusement at the sight of Buddy completely entranced by the cartoon. "Logan," Jack said slowly, "why is there a bear watching Looney Tunes in our living room?" Logan shrugged helplessly. "He likes Bugs Bunny." And so began another adjustment to their routine. Buddy was now allowed limited access to the house, always under strict supervision, and to everyone's surprise, his favorite activity was watching cartoons. He would sit for hours, eyes glued to the screen, ears twitching at the sounds. Sometimes he would even fumble behind the TV, searching for the animals he saw on screen, scratching at the wall in frustration when he couldn't find them, sending Logan and Jack into fits of laughter. The kitchen became another source of unexpected joy. Jack had always loved cooking, turning meal preparation into silly musical performances that had once delighted his wife and continued to entertain Logan. With Buddy as a new audience member, these performances reached new heights of absurdity. Jack would grab pots and pans, using them as impromptu instruments while dancing around the kitchen and singing made-up songs about whatever he was cooking. To their amazement, Buddy seemed to appreciate the show. He would jump onto the kitchen table despite Jack's half-hearted objections, stand upright on his hind legs, raise his front paws, and sway in rhythm, tilting his head as if keeping time with the music. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jack announced one evening, wielding a wooden spoon like a microphone, "for tonight's performance, I am joined by the amazing, the spectacular, the one and only Buddy Bear, on cue." Buddy rose onto his hind legs and swayed, his furry face looking so serious that Logan collapsed in helpless giggles. Their kitchen had transformed into a stage, and every meal preparation became a family show starring Jack and his unlikely co-star. Even private moments weren't safe from Buddy's curious nature. Jack discovered this one morning when he went to use the bathroom and found himself with an unexpected audience. Buddy had somehow figured out how to open the bathroom door and had developed a peculiar habit of climbing onto the toilet seat, sitting solemnly and watching Jack through the mirror as if supervising his morning routine. The first time it happened, Jack nearly jumped out of his skin. "Buddy, privacy please," he sputtered, trying to shoo the bear out, but Buddy merely tilted his head, clearly confused by Jack's objection to his presence. The situation reached peak absurdity when Jack reached for the toilet paper one morning, only to have Buddy snatch the roll and dash from the bathroom. Jack found himself calling for Logan's help as Buddy raced through the house, trailing toilet paper, creating a chaotic mess that was both frustrating and hilarious. "Your bear," Jack said with mock sternness when they finally cornered Buddy, "needs etiquette lessons." Logan dissolved into laughter. "Sorry, Dad, I think he thinks it's a game." But beyond these comical moments, there were deeper connections forming. Buddy's affection for Logan and Jack manifested in unexpected and touching ways. One afternoon, Logan was sprawled on the couch, pretending to faint during a game of superheroes. Buddy, who had been dozing nearby, suddenly became alert, rushing to Logan's side with what could only be described as panic in his eyes. The bear cub gently patted Logan's cheek with his paw, then, to their astonishment, rummaged through a nearby basket until he found the small first aid kit they kept in the living room. Dragging the kit to Logan's side, Buddy proceeded to thump the boy's chest with his paw, a serious expression on his furry face as if administering CPR. Logan couldn't maintain his pretense and burst into laughter while Buddy continued his earnest life-saving efforts, whimpering with genuine concern. "He really thought I was hurt," Logan marveled later, still touched by Buddy's reaction. It wasn't just Logan who benefited from Buddy's affection. On difficult days, Buddy seemed to sense Jack's mood, quietly approaching to rest his head on Jack's leg, his dark eyes offering silent companionship that somehow eased the burden of single parenthood. Similarly, when Logan's nightmares struck, leaving him thrashing and crying in the night, he would often wake to find Buddy had somehow sensed his distress and climbed onto the bed, wrapping his front legs around the boy in a gesture that could only be described as a hug. Summer deepened, and with it, Buddy grew. No longer the skinny, frightened cub they had rescued, he was now robust and healthy, his black coat gleaming in the sun. His injured leg had healed completely, leaving only a slight scar as a reminder of their first meeting. Jack knew they should be thinking about Buddy's future, but the topic became increasingly difficult to broach with Logan. Buddy had become integrated into their daily lives in ways Jack could never have anticipated. The bear had an uncanny ability to sense when someone in the house was sad or upset and would immediately attempt to cheer them up, dragging slippers to the bed, pulling a coat to the balcony as if suggesting a walk, or performing an elaborate pratfall that never failed to elicit laughter. "Do we have to find another place for Buddy?" Logan asked one evening, voicing the question that had been hanging between them for weeks. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "He's a wild animal, Logan. He'll keep growing. Eventually, he'll be a full-sized black bear. We have to think about what's best for him. But he's happy here," Logan insisted. "And he makes us happy. Isn't that what's best for everyone?" Before Jack could respond, a noise from the front of the house caught their attention. A car door slammed, followed by the sound of voices. Jack tensed, motioning for Logan to take Buddy to his den while he investigated. At the front door, Jack found two officials from the local conservation agency, their expressions serious as they introduced themselves and explained the purpose of their visit. "We've received reports of a bear being kept on this property," the senior officer said. I'm sure you're aware that keeping wildlife, especially a potentially dangerous predator, is illegal without proper permits. Jack's heart sank. Someone must have seen Buddy in the yard despite their precautions. He considered denying everything but knew that would only delay the inevitable. Instead, he decided on honesty. "My son found a bear cub caught in an illegal trap," he explained. "It was injured and abandoned. We contacted every wildlife agency and rescue organization we could find, but no one would take him. We were only trying to help until we could find a proper placement." The officers exchanged glances, their expression softening slightly at Jack's explanation. After a tense discussion, they agreed to inspect the situation before making any decisions. Jack led them to the backyard and called for Logan. Reluctantly, his son emerged from the garage with Buddy following close behind. The officers watched with professional interest as Buddy immediately went to Logan's side, leaning against the boy with obvious affection. "He's remarkably tame," the younger officer observed. "That's part of the problem," Jack admitted. "He's lost his fear of humans, and his front leg where the trap caught him never regained full strength. He can't climb trees properly, which would make it hard for him to escape predators or find food in the wild." The senior officer knelt to examine Buddy more closely, maintaining a respectful distance. "How long have you had him?" "Almost 3 months now," Logan answered, his hand resting protectively on Buddy's head. "And you've been trying to find him a proper placement?" the officer asked Jack. Jack nodded, retrieving a folder from inside the house. "Here are copies of all the emails and call logs. No one had space, or they weren't equipped for bears, or they were concerned about the liability." The officers reviewed the documentation, then conducted a thorough inspection of Buddy's living quarters and the modifications Jack and Logan had made to their property to accommodate him safely. Throughout the inspection, Buddy remained calm, occasionally investigating the strangers with curious sniffs but mostly staying close to Logan. Finally, the senior officer sighed. "Normally, we would be obligated to remove the animal immediately. However, this is clearly an unusual situation." Hope flickered in Logan's eyes. "Can he stay with us?" "That's not a simple question," the officer replied. "Your father is right, black bears can grow to be quite large, and even with his tame behavior, there are significant safety and legal concerns." Seeing Logan's crestfallen expression, the officer continued more gently, "But it's also true that this bear has clearly formed attachments to your family, and you've made significant efforts to provide appropriate care. His injury and habituation to humans would make reintroduction to the wild problematic at this point." After a lengthy discussion, the conservation officers proposed a compromise. Buddy could remain with the Jenkins family under several strict conditions. They would need to obtain special wildlife permits, construct a larger, more natural enclosure that met specific requirements, agree to regular monitoring visits, and ensure Buddy never came into contact with the general public. "It won't be easy," the senior officer warned, "and it will be expensive. But if you're willing to meet these conditions, we can work with you to make this situation legal and safe for everyone involved, including Buddy." The weeks that followed were a flurry of activity. Jack put his engineering skills to work designing and building an expanded enclosure that connected to the existing garage space, but extended into the backyard, providing Buddy with ample room to move and explore. They installed climbing structures, a larger pool, and various enrichment features recommended by wildlife experts. The permit process was complex and costly, requiring multiple inspections and testimonials from Marianne and other professionals who had observed Buddy's condition and behavior. Jack dipped into his savings to cover the expenses, but watching Logan's joy as they worked together on Project Buddy, as they called it, he couldn't bring himself to regret a single penny spent. By late summer, everything was in place. Buddy had a new, larger territory that balanced his need for space and stimulation with the necessary safety precautions. The conservation agency had granted their permits, with the understanding that regular monitoring would continue indefinitely. Life settled into a new normal. Buddy continued to grow, but his gentle nature remained unchanged. He still loved cartoons, still performed with Jack in the kitchen, and still seemed to understand when someone in the house needed comfort. The conservation officers who visited regularly often commented on the unusual bond between the bear and his human family. "I've never seen anything quite like it," one admitted after watching Buddy and Logan play a game that involved rolling a large ball back and forth. "He's still a bear, with all the instincts that entails, but there's something different about him, something special." On a late summer evening at sunset, Logan sat by the window in the living room, Buddy resting his head on the boy's shoulder, both gazing out at the forest beyond their yard. Jack stood in the doorway, watching them quietly, his heart full with a happiness he hadn't thought possible again after his wife's passing. If he had said no that day in the forest, how many precious moments would this family have missed? Outside, the wind blew in from the forest, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of autumn. Inside, Buddy lay between Logan and Jack, at peace, an inseparable part of their home. Not quite a pet, not quite wild, but something uniquely their own, a reminder that family comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most unexpected additions bring the greatest blessings.